So right now, our homepage looks great. We've got an exciting title. We've got some exciting buttons with some stuff, but our page is a little boring. I'm never a fan of just a square image with no image treatment on it whatsoever. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and I'm going to show you how to make some simple masks, and we're going to use some masks to create some more interesting image treatments on our pages. So I'm going to drag my timeline up a little bit so you can see it a little better. And I'm just going to peek at my timeline here. So I've got my background layer locked. None of the other layers locked. I got my pages layer kind of highlighted. That's what this pink thing is, showing it all the way across. I'm going to leave that pages layer highlighted. I'm actually going to lock all my other layers. It's just good practice to lock layers you're not using and unlock ones you start using. You know, take a little extra time, but it's usually worthwhile. You've put a lot of time in to be able to kind of lock things in place and not accidentally drag stuff or delete stuff or put stuff on the wrong layer. All right, so let's go into our first page. And again, what I mean by that when I say go into our first page, let's take the playhead over to your frame label that says page 1. So we see our movie clip here. And then with our pages layer unlocked, you should be able to double click somewhere on the actual graphics of the movie clip to take you inside of it, inside of its timeline. You can see the breadcrumb trail up here, scene 1, page 1, should be inside of page 1. All right, now inside of page 1, we've got our different layers. We got one for our image, our name, we got our back and our code buttons. Take a quick peek at the code just to remind kind of how we did this. So in this case, we used a variable for the timeline that we're going to tell what to do inside of our function. So we made a timeline out of this, which is representing this current timeline. And then this dot back on click. So when we click on the back button, we're going to tell the timeline's parent, not the current timeline, the timeline's parent, scene 1, to go to and stop home. We're able to copy and paste those layers also. That was another thing, is after we created this the first time, right click, copy layers, paste layers is a real powerful way. In fact, inside of Animate, you can really copy and paste almost anything. You can copy and paste content on the stage, which I've showed you before, kind of cutting and pasting from one layer to the next. You can also copy and paste entire selections. Like I could select all these frames, right click, and you can copy frames, cut frames, paste and overwrite, clear frames. I'm not gonna really do any of that right now, but it's worth noting that in the same way you can kind of make a selection and hold Alt and drag it to make copies, you can also just copy keyframes one at a time or 100 at a time with a bunch of tweens in there, whole selections across layers. You can copy the keyframes and then paste them in other locations. That can be very useful to like cut and paste out of one symbol into another, or something like that. Keep all your animations. So anyway, content on the screen, copy and paste keyframes, you can copy and paste entire layers. A lot of power to move things around. All right, so now let's go ahead and create some masks for this and show you what to do. Let's make a new layer above the image layer, and let's name it mask. Oh, won't let us name it mask. That's new. Interesting. Okay, well, let's name it image mask. There we go. All right, so just double click on the layer name to name it image mask. I'm using the popular programmer technique of camel case, they call it, where the first word is lowercase and then each successive word starts with an uppercase letter. And that's how you break up words. It's something you'll see in programming. So I'm going to name my layer image mask. And now I want to take the rectangle tool and we're going to set up a rectangle to use as a mask here. All right, we're going to do a fill and a stroke. So I just want you to have two separate colors for your fill and your stroke. I personally am going to set my stroke to white because I want it to match, I want the outline to match my name, title, and my back button. I think that'll look nice. And then my stroke, or my fill, actually, I can use bright red. You can use any kind of color. I like to use bright red when I'm using a mask. Some people use like bright yellow. but this fill is not actually going to show up. It's just going to like poke a hole through the layer to whatever's underneath. So it doesn't really matter what, whoops, I did this backwards. I fill, red, stroke, white. There we go. So I want a white line outline around a red filled rectangle. I don't want any curved corners or anything. Actually, yes, I do want curved corners. That would look lovely. I'm going to make, let's say, 20 pixels around the curved corner. All right. That's in the rectangle options here on the properties panel. So when I draw out my rectangle, it's got some nice curved corners. Undo that. But I would like my stroke size to be a bit bigger. I'll make my stroke size, say 10, and draw a little test rectangle. That looks about right. Command Z to undo. And now I want to actually draw one around my image. Now I'm going to double check before I draw on the scene to make sure that I have my image mask layer selected. That's where I want it to draw. And then again, back on the rectangle tool, I just went to my frame thing in my properties panel. I'm going to click back over on tool, and I can see I've got my fill to red, my stroke to white, my stroke size set to 10 pixels so I can see my outline has some thickness, and then 20 pixels for my rounded corners on my rectangle. Now, I go to draw this, it should, even though my image layer is locked, starting in the upper left corner, it should kind of snap to, no, it's not really snap, yeah it is, there we go. So it kind of subtly snaps to the corner there, which is nice. It's helpful to use kind of the built-in snapping stuff. So I'm going to get it right exactly perfect just by letting it snap, and poof, now I've got my rounded rectangle completely covering my bunny image. Poor Marvin is stuck in layer land. So now we're going to rescue Marvin from layer land by making this layer a mask. They basically are like a window through a layer into another layer, so you can see what's underneath in like a cutout and give it like a form. So to make a layer mask is really easy. All we have to do is right click on the layer name and choose mask. It's the same place where we created guide layers when we were making our motion path animation, if you remember our little creatures running across the landscape. Change that to mask, and when you do that, you can see a couple things happen. Again, just right click the image mask layer, it's just directly above the image layer, shows mask, and then it changes the layer's icon and gives it this little like rectangle with a black circle in the middle, and it also kind of like grabs the image layer and indents it underneath, okay? So whatever is kind of indented underneath the mask layer is going to actually be part of the mask. So as you can see, it worked in the sense that it used the whole rectangle and including the outline, which we're going to fix in a moment, and now we're looking through Marvin as rounded rectangles. Now already, even though it's subtle, that's much more professional and nice to have a subtle little rounded rectangle corners than have just, you know, sharp edges that looks like we just slapped an image on there. So giving this image treatment. Well, let's go a step further, and I want this outline actually around it. All right, so another thing to notice when you create a mask, besides it just changing the icon and indenting the layer underneath it, it also automatically locks both layers. And that's really interesting because if you unlock either of them, all of a sudden you don't see the effect anymore. So that's important to remember if you're trying to figure out why your mask won't work, is make sure that both your layers are locked, the mask and the layer being masked underneath it, and then you should see the effect. But if we want to make changes to it, then we've got to unlock one. So I want you to unlock your image mask layer. It doesn't matter if it's a fill or a stroke, or an image or text or paintbrush or anything. Whatever you put on the mask layer, doesn't even have to be a symbol, can be a symbol, doesn't have to be, will be the mask. And in this case, it's using the entire thing, but I don't want the entire thing. I want the outline to be actually visible, not part of the mask. So to do that, I just have to cut and paste it off of this layer onto a new layer above it that's not part of the mask. All right, so let's start by just making our new layer. I'm gonna make a new layer above my image mask layer and name it border. And then I basically just need to cut and paste that border from the image mask layer into this layer. Now, I just want to show you a quick way to do it, because if you try and click select it, you're probably just going to get each segment at a time, and I'd have to click it like 8 times, hold each shift. I get the top segment, I get that corner, I get the side segment, I get the next corner, this segment, get the next corner. You know, that's not too bad, but if you're doing this with a more complicated shape, like maybe you're using like the polystar tool or something, it can take a long time to select all your edges. So a good way to do it, if you're trying, I use this a lot with selecting things. Sometimes it's best to start with selecting everything and then just deselect what you don't need, all right? So to do that, you could either just marquee select around the entire thing, or I like to just click on the keyframe, and if you click on the keyframe on the timeline, it will automatically select everything on that layer. All right, so instead of having, now it's taking much longer because I'm explaining it, but in practice, it's much, much faster. Then instead of click selecting and holding shift to select all the way around the entire border, if I start by selecting everything and all I do is shift select the middle. So if I hold shift and click in the middle on the fill, which will deselect, now all of a sudden I'm left with my border is the only thing left. All right, and so that's a much faster way just to quickly select everything, deselect the middle instead of selecting all the way around the outside. So nice little tip. Now that we have our border, I'm just going to cut it. You can use the right click menu. I'm going to use the keyboard Command X to cut it. And then I'm going to go up to my border layer and make sure I paste it in place. I'm going to do Shift Command V, or you could right click and paste in place. And now, if I lock my layers again, now that looks much nicer. Now that's more of an image treatment. So now I have the mask that actually is only the fill area of that shape that's showing through the bunny, and the border is actually bordering the image. And it's subtle, but it looks much nicer than just that image slapped in there, right? So the last thing with masks is often, there's not a lot of times where I use this outline block, right? So over here in the layers thing, you've got locking your layers, you've got your visibility, which is all kind of obvious. You know, in fact, I'll do these on the name layer. So I can lock my name layer so I don't actually nudge it. Make Marvin go away. You've got the box, which is an outline thing. If you click the little colored box, it'll show you, well, text is a bad example. I'll just make them all. Okay, so if I click all of these, it kind of shows the outlines of certain things. I like to make my actual image mask, once I've got it in place, just a little pro tip, I like to make it an outline. And here's why. If it's not an outline, when I unlock either my image mask layer or my image layer, I just see the big mask, I don't see the image underneath. But what if I wanted to adjust the image underneath? I'd have to like hide my mask layer and all kinds of things. So what I like to do is I like to leave my mask layer itself on outline, so that when it's locked, I still see the effect. But then if I unlock either my image or my mask layer, like let's say I want to nudge Marvin somehow, if I unlock it, it doesn't show me, well, here, I'll hide the border so you can actually see it. The border was on top of it. But if I unlock it, I can just see the mask in an outline, showing me this purple line, and I can still see my image underneath. So I could like adjust where my image is without having to like turn my mask on and off. So just another quick little pro tip there that I use a lot whenever using masks. I kind of outline them once I finish it up. So this page looks a little better. And next, what I want you guys to do is I want you to create a mask on each of your other 3 pages. But I'm just going to real quickly blow through it, and I'll just talk through the second one real quickly and then let you guys kind of go ahead. But I want you to get it creative with your mask. You can use multiple shapes. You can put shapes together. You can use text. There's a little trick to using text, which I'll show you in the end. You can also just like paint and use brush strokes, things like that. So maybe I'll show you that one, because that's kind of cool. I'm going to go over to page 2. And also you can use the polygon tool. That's interesting to draw. Oops. I'm going to make a mask layer above my image real quick. I'll name it mask image. Nope. Image mask. And I'm going to, let's see, you could draw some funky shapes with the polygon tool. remember underneath the polygon tools, there's this tool option, star tool, where you could draw like some interesting different stars. Kind of fun with masks. Any of the shapes, put them together, whatever. You could draw things with the pen tool, like actually draw shapes and connect them, fill them in and use those as a mask. I'm going to go ahead and use the paintbrush tool right here. It's got a fill of red here. I have no idea what size it is. Start painting. Okay, that's a decent size. I should be able to hold the B key. No, I don't know how to change the size, but who cares? Actually, here it is. Yeah, I'm going to make this up to maybe 25. And now on my mask layer, I'm just going to like squiggle. Now I'm going to right click it, mask, poof. Now I have this exciting artistic Frodo just looking out into the distance. Lock my layer and save my file. So I want you just to create 3 more masks. Just get creative with them, make masks and make, use outlines if you want, and just, see what you can do with your other pages. Made some masks to make our pages look a little more exciting. So we did Marvin together, some nice rounded corners, nice border. Back here, Frodo, I used just a brush to kind of show that you can just do streaks, a little artistic look. Muffin, I used the poly star tool to make a star, a 12-pointed star, and made Marvin all funky with a few different shapes. Muffin, not Marvin. Frodo, Marvin, Muffin. And now the last one, this is one thing I want to show you guys, is text and other things, but text can be a little tricky, okay? So inside of Animate, I have this mask, I'm so cute and happy, I'm so cute and happy, I'm so cute and happy, woohoo. And I just typed some text in, I made it bold, adjusted the kerning and all of that stuff to make it fit as nice as I could. And this is sitting over Flopsy. It doesn't look great in this situation, but having masked text can give you some pretty interesting effects. But what's interesting is, similar to some other things, like when we learned that the tint and color effects besides alpha don't really work inside the browser. I go back to my browser and I click and look at this, I have just an eye. It's just my first character here, all right? And that's all it's doing. And I don't know why it doesn't work, but I know how to fix it and make it work, okay? So I'm going to go inside of my page here, unlock my mask layer, and I've got my text box that I made. Now, for whatever reason, it just doesn't like using text as a mask. But what you can do is you can actually break apart text into a specific, into its vector shapes, basically. And you have to break it apart twice. So I'll show you what I mean. Break apart is the command that usually we use to undo a symbol. So if we create a symbol and then want to undo it, or create a symbol out of a bunch of things, want to like pull those things out of the symbol, you can go to modify, break apart, or command B, and that will usually unsymbol something. Now there's other things you can break apart besides symbols, kind of bubble them up to the top. Fonts is one of them. So if I select this text, and I go to modify, break apart, first time, it actually breaks it up into individual letters, okay? Now, I'll try it again. I'll go publish, look at it, I still see just the I, okay? This is actually worthwhile sometimes though. Like a lot of times if you're trying to animate text and you want to break it up into separate letters to do some kind of funky custom text animation, that's a really good way to do it, is just lay everything out in your regular type and then do command B and you break it into individual elements. Then you would go in and make a graphic symbol out of each individual element you wanted to animate. Still would take a long time, but sometimes the time put in on a custom animation is worth it. But for this purpose, to show the mask, I'm going to select all of my letters again here, and I just need to break them apart again. So the first time I broke them apart, that took it from the full text object into individual elements. I can go to modify, break apart again with them all selected, and now it turns them into actual vector shapes. So I could technically like grab a part of one and move it just like I could as if it was a shape. Now that I've changed it into vector shapes, now for whatever reason, Now it works. And now I can see the text through my mask here. So just a little tip, if you try and use text and don't understand why it's not working, break it apart twice until it's the vector shape, and then you'll be able to see your mask through it. All right, so now my pages are looking a little bit nicer. So we haven't done any animation yet, right? So we're just snapping right to things, which is fine, but the power of using this is we can move anything around. So let's go ahead and make some page transitions. Show you what I mean. Let's go back here into Animate, and I want to be up on the main timeline on scene 1, where I can see my actual home page, page 1, page 2, page 3, and page 4. The last note on that text thing is that's just one more situation where you want to test things in a browser. Always test things in the browser. Don't ever just anticipate things are going to look or work or animate how you have it on the timeline. So it's get out of the habit of just using this play thing to kind of see what's going on. Always test your thing in the browser, which once you get interactive and have to click buttons to get around, you kind of have to anyway. Okay, so what we're going to do is make some page transitions, and to make these page transitions, we're not going to do anything new. We're just going to put new frames in on our timeline, and we're going to add, in fact, we're probably not going to put any frames. I guess it depends on how many you have. And we're going to add some animations. But what's cool about this is our entire page is already ready to animate because it's all just one symbol on the timeline. Okay, now this is an interesting kind of bend to the rule. I have talked about the 2 golden rules of animate and animate, where first of all, it must be on a symbol, and second of all, it must be on its own layer. Well, the second one, the must be on its own layer, could be bent a little bit in the sense that like there's actually 4 separate symbols on this pages layer, but we can animate them at one at a time. The rule really should say that number 1, it must be a symbol. Number 2, it must be the only thing on its layer at any given keyframe. Okay, so as long as I'm just animating keyframes that only have one single symbol on them, I can go ahead and animate these, and then I can animate the next one, I can animate the next one. Where I would get into trouble is if I had, for example, 2 pages on one keyframe and I try to just animate one of them. Then it's going to give me problems and connect them both and move them both and stuff like this. But it's a little bit of a bend to the rule. But that being said, we're ready to go to animate. We've got our symbol that we want to move, our entire page here already on a symbol, and it's the only thing on that keyframe. So let's go ahead and make a page transition. So all I mean by a page transition is just a simple animation into the page. So let's start by just fading it in. Let's do the most basic, right? So let's start by just setting up our animation. I'm going to do mine 10 frames. Now, I already have my pages separated by 15 frames. I did that on purpose. Up until this point, it doesn't really matter how many you have between, because the buttons are just telling the player to just go to and stop one of these frame labels. So it doesn't matter if they're 15 apart or 150 apart. It would work the same way. Well, I just want to make sure that there's at least 15 frames between them. If there's not, you can always just put your playhead somewhere in the middle and use F5 to add more frames in to all your layers at once, or Shift F5 to get rid of those layers. Right, I'm going to undo that, or get rid of that extra space. So just never forget that you're never stuck inside your timeline with your keyframes. You can always just stick the playhead in and use F5 and Shift F5 to add time and remove time. All right, so I've got mine 15 apart, and that's because I want to make my page transitions 10 frames, which is 1/3 of a second at 30 frames a second. It's going to be nice and quick. So at 10 frames, and then it gives me a little buffer until the next page hits. But at 10 frames on the pages layer, so for me, my page 1 is starting at frame 15, so I'm going over to frame 25, 10 frames later, and I'm going to make a keyframe, F6, or again, you don't want to use the keyboard, you can use the insert keyframe button here. You can right click and insert keyframe. And then I'm going to put my cursor in between my page 1, which is on 15, and my new keyframe. So I'm going to put my cursor in between there, right click, and choose Create Classic Tween. All right, so we've done nothing new. All we did is just make a keyframe and throw a tween in. We've done that 20 times so far, right? Easy enough. The next thing is I want to make sure I have my easing set up. That's something that I almost always do every single time I create a tween, because it's just easy and fast to do and remember it that way. I create a keyframe, go back in between the two keyframes, right click, add my classic tween, and once I add it, it's already selected. So it's really easy just to go over to my properties panel here and change this classic ease from 0 to 100. All right, so I've got my easing set up, and now I've got my animation all set up, added a keyframe on my pages layer, added my tween, put my easing on. Now I just have to do my actual animation, right? I want my page to fade in, meaning that wherever it is in page 1, this is where my transition should start, and then when it gets towards frame 25, then my transition should actually like end up looking the way it does now, because I want to be able to see the page. So what that means, on the page 1 label on frame 15 on my timeline, I'm going to actually set the opacity down to 0, so it'll animate fading in. I'm going to select the symbol on the stage, and then look over to my properties panel underneath where it says color effects, that none drop down, and choose alpha. And then I've got my slider to fade it in or out. Just remember me showing you that. And I'm going to fade it all the way down to 0. And I do this backwards all the time. I'll set up a transition and see my page for a half second and watch it fade out. So it happens, but just try and kind of keep track of where you're on the timeline. And then you can kind of scrub through it and make sure that, okay, if I tell it to play from the page 1 frame label, then I want it to, you know, fade in. So you should be able to see it fade in nicely like that. Okay, so now that we've got our fade, if we test it in the browser right now, there's a couple more steps we need to make this work. I'll show you what's happening now. If I test it in the browser and I go to this page, it's just blank. So we're going to go back over here, and in the code, in the button code, we're telling all these buttons to go to and stop this particular frame label, which is exactly what it's doing. And until we put our thing in there, that was fine. But now we need to go back into our button code. So to go into our button code, just click on that frame 1 of the code layer with that little lowercase a over it. Open up your actions panel, see all of our Bodacious Bunnies code here. We set our timeline variable, told our timeline to stop and wait for buttons to be clicked, wrote out a message to ourselves in the console, and we set up our 4 buttons. All of them say timeline.goto and stop a particular thing. Now we can change that to go to and play. We did this actually in our first button example. We played our move, shrink, and flip animations. So go ahead and change all 4 of these to play, because we're going to end up putting transitions on all 4 pages. All of the panels, if you lose one, lives under Window. Window Actions. And I say that because there's panels like in this little thing over here, like the color panel, the align panel, and then there's like the action panel, the timeline, the output, and all these things can like accidentally get moved and docked and turned off, and it can be very confusing. And the 2 things to kind of keep you grounded if you lose something is, 1, look for it in just Window, and you can usually find it there. But even if you were to do it and you still don't see it anywhere, then you'd go, and then maybe it's like drag in the middle of your monitor or something like that, or like an edge. I've done that before. Then you can always go into workspaces and like reset a workspace, or go back to essentials and reset essentials. And that in theory should set the interface kind of back to its default. So now I'll go back in, put up my actions, and go to and play, go to and play, go to and play, and go to and play. So just keep it in camel case again, make sure the P is uppercase, change all of these to go to and play. And now there's still one more thing we need, but we're just going to check it out in the browser and take it one baby step at a time. It's a good way to do things when you're developing. It's just check one little thing every time. It's easier to figure out, you know, how to move forward if you're stuck. If I go to this, it plays my transition, but then it continues playing all the way through. Shows us all of them. So what we need to do is we just need to stop the timeline. Easy enough. So what's happening is now when we click the button, it's going here and it's go to and play. It's playing our animation, but then it continues to play through the timeline until it hits the end, and then it loops, and then it finally stops and waits here because it hits that stop command. So we just need to put a stop command at the end of our animation. So because it's code, I'm going to put it on the code layer. I need to put a keyframe in the right spot to connect it to. So I'm going to put a keyframe right here on, it's frame 25 for me, but what's important is that it's vertical with the last frame in your animation, in your transition, I should say. So I'm going to put a keyframe here, F6, and then on that keyframe, I'm going to open up the Actions panel and type the stop command, this.stop. Open close parenthesis, semicolon. Whoops, this.stop, open close parenthesis, semicolon. So what we should see on the timeline is you should then see your keyframe with your little stop command here. It has the little lowercase a directly above your pages. Final keyframe in the animation. So now, if I go test this website again, now I go to that page. All right, now I have my animated transition. Fading in. Very smooth. But we know that we're going to want to set up the animations and the stops all in the same way for every page. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this stop command into the other spots, okay? Just knowing that I'm going to need to stop at the end of each page transition. I mean, it wouldn't take that long to just create a keyframe, go into the Actions panel, this.stop, open close parenthesis, semicolon. Do that 1, 2, 3 more times. Wouldn't take that long, but you know, over a day, again, continuing to use techniques to just make yourself faster, is just gonna make yourself a lot more productive and your life a lot better. So instead, I'm just gonna copy this keyframe. Again, notice I keep showing you how to copy things, copy layers, copy frames. It's really, really useful as we move forward and start getting more and more complicated to be able to reuse elements as much as possible. Keep harping on that. But to copy this keyframe, if you recall, we need to select it first. So I'm going to select it and make sure it turns blue here. Then I'm going to hold the Alt button and click and drag it over to 10 frames after page 2, and then again 10 frames after page 3, and then again 10 frames after page 4. So again, I'm just holding the Alt key while it's selected, and now after I've selected and I'm holding the Alt key, I can just click and drag, and then do it again, let go, do it again, let go. And I can very quickly like that, all of a sudden have a stop command after 1/3 of a second on each of my pages. All right, so now the other ones are set up to go ahead and make the tweens and start making transitions. But before we do that, I think that Marvin's transition is a little bit boring. I'm sure we have faded it in, but I want to have it kind of zoom and fade in. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm gonna go back to the very first keyframe of my page 1 transition here. And I'm going to select my invisible thing on the stage. So because the alpha is all the way down to 0, sometimes it can be a little confusing. But as long as I can always click the, that's another good use of the outline layer control, is if you've got stuff that's got 0 opacity, you can turn it to an outline and it'll still let you actually see it's there. But anyway, we know it's there. I'm going to click it and I want to scale it down some. I actually want to scale it down to a specific amount. I want to scale it 50%, let's say. So if I were to just use the free transform tool to scale this down, I wouldn't know exactly where 50% is, right? So how could I do that? It doesn't show me the scale over here in the properties panel. Before we were able to control the exact width and height of something, or the exact X and Y position of it on the stage right here. But if we want to control the exact scale of something or the exact rotation of something, there's a different panel we have to use, and that's this transform panel right here. All right, this transform panel that is like, it basically looks like the free transform tool. It has a box with all these little control handles on it. So if I open up that transform tool, I can see that it actually shows me scale up top. That's what these 100s are. And then it shows me rotation. I can even skew something if I wanted. The 3D stuff doesn't apply to our HTML5. But at the very top here, I've got two different 100s, and I've got this little constraint where I can either lock them together or I can unlock them. I'm going to lock it and then just change one of these 100s to 50 and hit enter. And that will make my page or my symbol that I had selected go down to 50% exactly. And now I can kind of scrub through my animation and I can see that it is zooming up and fading in. So I could have done that roughly just by using the free transform tool, but I want to point out that, you know, a lot of times you want to scale something to a specific amount or maybe rotate it a specific degree, and you can use this transform tool to do so. Now, another note on this kind of panel, these little flyouts right here, before we've used the color tool, which is where we played with like the gradient options. And then we use the align tool over here, which is where we could like align and space things differently. And now I'm showing you the transform tool. But notice that when you open one of them, they kind of open in little groups like this. So when I have transform open, I've got this info and align have little tabs right here. The same thing with when I have color open, I can go back and forth between color and swatches pretty easily. So just something to be aware of the way the interface works, that if you have one of these tabs open, they kind of stick together. But anyway, a new panel I'm showing you here, the transform tool. Now that I've done that, I can test it in my browser, and now my transition is much more exciting. Okay, it's got the nice ease, so it rests into place, and it fades in and it zooms in. So on page 2 now, I've already got my stop set up. So all I have to do is just set up my tween and animate something for a page transition. I know I talked through a lot there, but let me show you how quickly we can do it for page 2. So we very, very quickly copied our stop command to the right spot. So in the same spot, 10 frames later, a third of a second, I'm just going to keyframe there, right click between them, create classic tween. Change my easing to 100, so I want it to ease into place. And then I'm going to do my animation. I'm going to go to the beginning of it here, because this is where I want to start. Choose this, and let's say I want Frodo to maybe come in from the side. So I'm just going to drag this over off the stage. And now I can see my animation happen. And if I test it in the browser, just like that, got a page that does this. Now I've got like a swiped page. It kind of comes in and slides in. Very, very cool. So doesn't take a lot if you set it up right on your timeline, that you can have entire pages with, I mean, this only has a few layers. You could have something very, very complicated, all kind of contained and grouped into a single movie clip. You could throw it all around the screen. I do this all the time when building apps to control like major sections of the app in a single movie clip and being able to kind of transition between pages and have things slide around. Our back button just snaps back to our home page. That's fine. In fact, that's common on the web or in interfaces is if you're going forward to have some kind of smooth animation and stuff going on, that whenever you're going backward to not waste the user's time and snap back to wherever they had been before. You know, you could have them bigger and zoom down so they kind of land. You could play with the easing and go, you know, 100 ease in instead of 100 ease out, and have them kind of snap into place instead of softly rest into place. You could have things slide in from any angle. You could have things fade in. You could rotate things as part of your transition, but just get creative and make a transition for each page.